So, good morning. I see one is hearing me. Thank you for your participation today. It's always an interesting exercise here because I don't hear myself, but that's part of this activity here. So, my name is Bertram Dorn. I'm a solutions architect for security and compliance for Amazon Web Services in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And yeah, we want to talk a little bit about documents. Documents are fun. Why are documents fun? Because there are several things our customers should read, should know of, should review from time to time. And those things easily get lost sometimes. Or in the role I run, I help customers to understand us. We typically get this question, well, do you have X, Y, Z? How do I do what? And where do I find further information? And therefore, we can also say, well, what's applicable for an account setup? What should you have read before? And of course, as a employee from Middle East Africa on the security and compliance space, we touch a lot of data protection, data privacy topics, which I will link to this talk today too. So, it's important to set the scene. This is not necessarily something a developer would watch. Still, there are things in this documentation, as we said, which are important for developers. I will lay them out later. For example, we will look into account setup. This is something where developers or builders need to work together with business, decision takers. I also would say risk takers. And also where people should work together in the area of risk, compliance, data protection, so everyone who is in this framework. While the data protection officers and also compliance officers most likely are not taking the risk, they're not accepting the risk, they're there to qualify this before a decision taker is going out. And therefore, account setup is something important where everyone needs to work together up front to get things done. The other thing which we'll look into is the click-through agreement. Why? Because that's where everything starts. And no click-through agreement or no other contractual start point, there is nothing. Typically, I say, well, you need to go through this once. And while many of us are used to just click through things, the click-through at AWS, that is a lifelong thing for the AWS life because it accompanies the complete AWS usage. We'll look into service terms and everything which is around it. As a little disclaimer, I will not open the service terms in this talk. I will not look what exactly they say because they're just too long, but I will point out and highlight some aspects of the service terms which are important from a technical, compliance, and decision-taking standpoint. That directly leads to the AUP, acceptable use policy. Question which we get here pretty often as well, can I scan AWS? Why can't I scan AWS, for example? What I'm allowed, what I'm not allowed, and what happens. Interesting enough, that leads back to account basics. And we'll see why this comes later, because the AUP is applicable to a account. And last but not least, we'll look into SLAs, service level agreements. Why? Because they are part of the life on AWS. They're important in a contractual or in a business relationship with AWS to know what you can count on. Good. Typically, I would ask for questions now, but first of all, we have people watching on TV or later on the social media, and well, with all the headphones, it's difficult to ask questions. In the case you have questions, I'm hanging around a little bit afterwards, and you'll get me here. Good. Let's boogie, as we would say here in the US sometimes. We'll talk about an overview. At the end, I'll build a little tree, how things work together. Thought about doing this in the presentation step by step, but that's overloading a little bit. That does also mean we connect each other. The documents itself, where is coming what from, so how is, for example, the DPA made applicable? And It's a bridge. It's a technology bridge. The technology bridge is out there because if you use a service, you should know what the service is doing for you and which commitments are behind the service. From my life as explaining customers AWS, it's pretty interesting sometimes that the services are a little bit misunderstood. And in the worst case, the usage of a service needs to be adjusted. And that's something I would like to discuss with customers before than doing it afterwards. And for the audience, well, this everyone who's in this framework, in this circle of compliance, data protection, risk, decision taking. If you code, that's nice because we'll come to some coding points too, not necessarily line by line, but in especially how to scan AWS or how to scan your applications on AWS is definitely something which is touching also builders. Good. Account basics. Account basics are not so straightforward as you think, and especially if you look into many accounts. So let's clean up. What's an account? An AWS account is basically a structure with a 12-digit account number. That's it. An account, by the way, is not a VPC, it's not a resource. Whenever I hear our internal people saying well, we communicate with the account or we send something to the account, I need to step back a little bit and try to adjust that, because technically spoken, that would mean you send something to the account's metadata, like the name of the account. This is something where you can interact with the account. Otherwise, you interact with resources which are associated to an account. And the main thing of an account is the 12-digit account number. The link between a human or a organization and the 12-digit account is a contract. And that's a one-on-one relationship. So even if you use later organizations and have a virtual structure of accounts, they still represent individual contracts. It's a very important point later if you go into scanning and SLAs. And the relationship is set up through the billing address. If you pay for it, if you can prove that you pay for it, most likely you can prove that you own the account. If you have some metadata in the account, like account name is equal your name, that doesn't count anything. So the billing address is important, and who can control the root access to the account. That is ownership. Everything else might be something different. And especially if you're in the partner space, think about that. If you're reselling AWS, the setup might be pretty interesting. There's another talk from me about how to do that, but it's nothing which we touch today. Inside this metadata, there's an email address. You can get information from and to this email address. So, for example, if we need to reach out to you because of challenges, we contact you through this main email address. It's very important that you monitor those email addresses. We strongly recommend to not personalize this email address, to use something like an office mailbox or something wider. We have too many cases in the past where people come in, say, well, I don't control this email address, or the email address is not existing anymore, but I own the account. And then we say, well, proof. That's fun, yeah, right? It's the sort of fun you can prevent by having set things up nicely. And behind this account structure, we have the service level agreements. We have IAM, the identity and access management of AWS, for accessing resources associated to the account. We have the billing, very important. And we have support contracts or support relationships. So if you call a support case, you must give us a 12-digit account number you want to talk about. We send you bills tracked down to 12-digit account numbers, and the IAM thing is based on, well, guess what? 12-digit account numbers. And therefore, those are the account resources. This is an individual one-off account. So If we change this into many, in the worst case, you get something like this. You get more accounts, more accounts, more accounts, more accounts. You get lots of contracts. You get lots of SLAs. You get lots of IM and so on. And people found out, well, this is nice. If you ask me why to do multi-account strategy, I can give you long talks here because I think I've been the first one doing this, spreading it out in 2014 to distribute things into resource accounts, logging account, security account, and things like that. So if you want to talk about this, catch me. I can give you the source of this and what's the thinking behind it. It's not so much scaling, and especially in account creation. In the past, we needed to ask you for credit card numbers. So if you have 1,000 accounts, you gave us 1,000 times your credit card number. It's not scaling. So we introduced something called organizations. And with organization, we do the following. We take a account, another 12-digit account number, by the way, with a new contract, with an own contract. It's the same thing like every other account. An organization's root account is not different than a member account. But we take something out from the members. For example, we take out the billing. We take the billing over to the main account. Also, we move over contracts of support to the main account. And partially, we do something like moving IAM over through service control policies. The service control policy, you cannot modify an IAM setup inside a member account, but you can dominate it. You can give it guardrails through service control policies. So that's what's happening with a multi-account. Very important. A member account inherits the contractual aspects of the main account. So if you start more stuff underneath of that, basically DPA and other things are inherited from the main account. While SLAs are not inherited. SLAs are individual for each account. And later you will see that also scanning guidelines, abuse topics are by 12-digit account number. Great. So keep this in mind. We have this in other presentations too. It sorts out a little bit what's an account. And to reiterate, an account is not a VPC, an account is not an EC2 instance, an account is not an object in an S3 bucket. I strongly encourage everyone in this space, security, compliance, data protection, decision making, to make a distinction here, because you don't send stuff to an account. Good. So, where to start? Everything starts here. Who has seen this? Yes, one. Great. Who has read those things? Okay. One. Great. You remember it? No. Well, I can tell you, as of today, we have standard terms here. Yeah. I could give you interesting examples what can happen if you don't read those things. On AWS, well, it's there. It must be there. We call this a click-through agreement, because basically you click it through. But basically everything starts here, sooner or later. And there is a nice link to the custom agreement. And please read it, or at least make someone in your organization to have read it. That's an important part, because there are things set up which are important, especially in legal topics like billing. Again, that's important, or liability or other things. So what's in the custom agreement? Basically, it sets a base. When I reviewed this with the content ladies here, they asked me, well, why do we start there, down there? Because typically you read it top down. And I said, well, you know what? We make definitions here, sometimes at the end of the document, which are important. And we define, for example, the AWS network. We define what support is. We define other standard terms in the definitions, and we define who are the contracting parties. That's an important part because, for example, if you link it to compliance, is the contracting party you work with the same party you get the compliance report, for example, ISO 27000 for? If there's a disconnect, you should ask something, right? Otherwise, you work with someone who's not in scope of the ISO certificate. Doesn't happen with us. We have everything in scope through having our ISO certificate under all affiliates of AWS. That's nice. But it's a typical thing which happens in the industry that the scopes don't match. So contracting parties, definitions, for example, the AWS network, which is basically the complete AWS system. We call it AWS network. If we reference it later, say the AWS network, that means everything. So therefore, the definitions are important. And then we call out things like how to use our services. We talk about changes. How do we communicate changes? What happens with changes? We talk about security and privacy. We call out what are the security standards we are committing to. We call out responsibilities, not only our responsibilities, also the customer's responsibilities in general. There will later be more responsibilities through specific services, but that's another topic for the next page. Also, well, important, payment, yeah. We have a contract, you use services, there needs to be something set up about this. Currency is an important topic, tax stuff, but that's more legal. And also we talk about temporary suspension, which is something I already touched. If you violate the acceptable use policy, you run into those terms, and it's interesting to know what's written in there. And tell you what, if we as security architects tell, yeah, multi-account is good because of blast radius, well, that's exactly what happens. If you run into an abuse situation and we would isolate the resources in one account, if you have sorted out those resources into different workloads, we only touch one workload. Yeah, if you accidentally have your complete company in one account, we touch, well, your company. So therefore, the suspension is important to know. Also, the same for termination. What happens at the end? From a data protection standpoint, that's pretty important. Like what happens if our contract is coming to a point where someone of the parties doesn't want to continue? What's happening with the data? What are the commitments? And that's an important part, especially in data protection. Rights and, well, liability. As an SA, a solution architect, I'm not allowed to talk about liability. It's a little bit earthquake that I'm even using the word as an SA on a stage. But if you want to know about liability, the click-through agreement, that's your point to go. And please read it. Yeah, that's, and especially if you make an appointment, if you make a contract between the larger company and AWS, I think this is something you need to cover. So, summarizing, read it, get it done. And if you have specific regulatory things you need to address, and we're aware this can happen, please work with us. Our click-through agreement is made for millions of customers. It's not made for a specific one. It's not made for a specific use case. And it's like electricity or gas. Everyone gets a standard gas contract easy, right? Well, maybe no more gas in the winter, who knows? But in general, you get your standard contract. But if you start to use a lot of electricity or a lot of gas, you can negotiate some things. And that's exactly what you can do with us too. Not necessarily negotiating, but you can talk with us and find out what can be done in relation to your business to make this more aligned to each other. So yes, work with your account team, please. Yeah, and the customer agreement is accompanied by the service terms. That's something which is not necessarily known so much, but it's a core thing for some of the solutions architects and security compliance to not forget that. Why? Because the service terms define specific topics. First of all, some generic topics, for example, the data protection addendum, which is necessary to process data under privacy laws like GDPR in the European Union or the UK Data Protection Act. Those are made applicable to all customers through the service terms. The service terms have specific layout or specific rights for services and give also specific possibilities to customers for a service. Give you an example. An easy one is that the service terms incorporate the necessary lines for using third-party products on AWS. For example, with Cloud HSM, the Cloud HSM library, or how to deal with Microsoft licenses. All those things are EC2 specific or Cloud HSM specific, so there's a specific service term for it. Also, our AI and ML services have specific service terms because some of those services are living also from us being able to train those AI ML models, and we have specific rights to do this with data which is submitted to us. An interesting topic which we need to cover from time to time is that service terms are dynamic. And especially a legal team of a customer can start to have horizontal lines on the forehead, if you know what I mean. If they see, well, we can change service terms on the fly. There's a reason. We wouldn't be agile with new services or add-ons to services if we wouldn't be able to change the service terms if necessary. And if we agree on service terms with each customer individually, we would need to rediscuss all those service terms again and again and again, and then we would be not a cloud company, we would be a service term discussion company. That's not scaling. Therefore, we need to have a scalable way to add terms and conditions, to modify terms and conditions, but that also puts some, let me say, task on the customer side to read those service terms from time to time, especially when you use a new service. We have specific service terms, for example, for systems manager, AI, ML, EMR, and some others, where I strongly recommend to just read them once before you use the service. And make up your mind, is what you read what you expect, and is it meeting your risk appetite? If we summarize that, it's an interesting point that the service terms have the strongest position because, as I said, we can change them on the fly. Yeah? That does mean if there's a conflict between things you already had and new service terms, the new service terms will supersede things you already had. And a very good example for this is the data protection addendum, DPA, for the GDPR, which is adjusted based on the outcome of the law discussions. And we made the DPA applicable to all customers automatically. So in the past, we needed to discuss this individual with customers and get signatures, but making this applicable through service terms has been a very scalable way to equip all customers with a DPA, whether they had this discussion with us or not. Also, as I said, it's highly recommended, just to speak it out, to read the service terms before you use something. Might look weird, might stop you in agility, but in the end, if we look into data protection or other topics in the, let me say, sensitive data workloads, the core of cloud usage is scoping the cloud usage to your risk appetite. There might be things left and right of a service offering which doesn't meet your risk appetite. That's okay. And if you remember, we have the service control policies, you can set those things up. But that's exactly the point where legal, compliance, risk takers, technology, data protection needs to work together to review the commitments which are going in both directions and make an assessment which service is working for you and which service you might not like in the moment. And that can be turned down into service control policies, for example. Good. DPA, the data processing addendum. We come to some more interesting stuff later, but for me as a European and being involved into data protection since approximately 30 years, that's an interesting point, of course. We have specific aspects here. First of all, we have a general AWS GDPR DPA for the European Union and for the UK. It's automatically applicable if the GDPR is applicable, the DPA is there. When the GDPR is applicable, that's another talk. That's your own decision. I strongly recommend to follow our talks and make up your own mind on the law, whether or not it's applicable to your data. Just a second. So the DPA sets up technical organization measures, so-called TOMs. TOMs are not Tomcat chasing cherry. TOMs are things which are technically done to protect data, protect assets. And it's a requirement by law to have them called out so that a customer or a processor who's using AWS knows what we take care of. You could think about, okay, well, we can count to 3 now, then Bertram needs to talk about shared responsibility. No security talk without shared responsibility, but this is going a little bit further. It's not only saying, well, there is shared responsibility, it's also saying, well, this is what we do. This is what you can rely on. That also means that the DPA, the data processing addendum, is making the availability of reports like SOC 1 mandatory. And similar, it makes mandatory that we are having services ISO 27001 or the successor of ISO 27001 certified. That's not something where we can opt out anymore. There's a commitment from us to be certified, and that's pretty strong, and especially if your DPOs or risk takers are asking, well, where's your commitment that this stays? Well, in the DPA. It's there. The DPA is also setting up the necessary audit path. Yes, our customers have audit rights. Did you know? We have contractually wrote them down. Do those audit rights fit all your needs? I don't know. From our standpoint, they meet the requirements from the named laws. Important is that we have discussed that and that we have printed it once. So you have audit rights. Now you need to find out, do they work for you or not? But that's a different discussion. It calls out responsibilities. It calls out data transfer aspects. And especially nowadays, with the new interpretations which are out there, the data transfer gets more weight. Also, the data transfer assessment or data transfer impact assessment, something which is important, and the starting point for such an assessment is the DPA. Also, which comes up pretty often as well, where are your standard contractual clauses? Well, first of all, we are talking about standard contractual clauses of the EU, and we have directly incorporated them through the service terms. Both. There are 2 standard contractual clauses. There are the standard contractual clauses for controllers to processors, so collectors or controllers to processors, and there are standard contractual clauses from processors to processors. The SCCs are standard contracts which are meeting the requirements from the European Commission to protect data if it's transferred or run on a system of us. So, and we have the supplementary addendum. Supplementary addendum calls out specific responsibilities for AWS, where we talk about what happens if we get a question to your data. That's written down in supplementary addendum. Also very important nowadays to accompany the data protection addendum itself. So, I already mentioned the ISO certification, the SOC reports are mandatory. Sometimes customers don't find this in the normal contracts, and it's a fast forward to say, well, DPA, it's there. We must have those things. It's not, we can't opt out. That's also a strong thing. I think, and I've seen in customer discussions resonating very well, that we don't only have those things, that we also have a contractual commitment to keep it. That crosses off some of the questions, especially with risk takers. So summarizing that, DPA is available for all customers. Great. And we have additional information on the GDPR page for AWS. I don't need to go in there now. There are other talks doing this. Strongly recommend them. If you have questions, well, please reach out to us. Contact us, contact your account team. We're able to explain those things. Good. 29 minutes left and some slides left. I'm good in the time. Normally that's interaction time, but with our setup, well, what to do? I should bring my piano or my synthesizers, then maybe I would have more audience today. But it's nice to be able to talk about this, because in the end it's ending up. I've done a similar talk, the last reInvent in person, about technical organizational measures, how they map to compliance needs. Don't underestimate this. We as ACE, inclusive me, we also do technical stuff. We can go down to CPUs, memory, or whatever. But the link between compliance and technology gets more and more important. And bridging this is very interesting. For example, how often have you heard that someone is talking about the keys? Where are the keys? And while I can imagine which keys they mean, I have to ask, well, which keys do you mean? If you use AWS, there might be 5, 6 different key types in the picture. Which one do you need? Let's discuss. And that's exactly where we need to bridge things. But I'm going a little bit off topic here. Let's go to the next point, acceptable use policy, AUP. So whenever you have an AWS person saying, well, that's violating the AUP, you're already in trouble. The acceptable use policy is basically telling you what you can do on AWS and, more important, what's not. So the AUP tells you, for example, not to attack others. The AUP tells you which content you should run, or more or less which content you should not run. It has a link to the violation page. Whenever you have something where you think that needs to be reported, well, I have a challenge, well, use this link. Go to the AUP, there's a link, and put it in. We call this an abuse report or incoming. It's an interesting part. The scanning policies, so if you have a workload which you need to scan against vulnerabilities, are based on the AUP. Because if you don't stick to the scanning policies, you violate the AUP. And violation of the AUP is not a good idea, because violating the AUP can lead to termination, or at least to isolation. So in the best case, we first send you an email and then start building guardrails around your resources. In other cases, we might take action. Yeah? If your resources on the AWS infrastructure start to attacking others, we have, well, danger in motion, and we need to take action, right? So the AUP sets things up. It's important to know what's in there and what's not. And as I said, the violating the AUP can lead to suspension or termination. In this case, if you remind back to the 12-digit account number, the AUP is linked to the 12-digit account number. So if you do something, we're not going down the organization and terminate or isolate or suspend everything. We would go down to the 12-digit account number and start acting there. And that's what we mean if we talk about limiting the blast radius. If you ever run into this, happened, the AUP and the 12-digit account numbers limit your impact. Also, there might be misunderstanding, or there might be signalizing from our side that something's going wrong and we need to take action. For example, misusage of CloudFront. In this case, we might just stop your CloudFront distribution for a little. And we reach out through the email address of the account to you and try to resolve things. We try to do this the right way, but just be on our side. If you have millions of CPUs and lots of network possibilities and IP addresses, and give people the availability to do whatever they want, we need to control it a little bit. So therefore, AUP is important. And as I already mentioned, the AUP is enforced by 12-digit account number. That makes the 12-digit account numbers pretty important. Good. What's around the AOP? Around the AOP, we have scanning, scanning policy, what you can do, what you cannot scan. We make a differentiation between scanning and testing. We do this in the team I work with, I would say once a week with a customer in Europe, Middle East, Africa, to explain them what's scanning, what's testing. Because customers saying, well, we can't scan our application. And then we ask, well, what are you doing? And then they say, yeah, we do credential stuffing on our login page. Well, that's not really scanning AWS, right? That's testing your application. Making this differentiation is very important, and we help customers carving the wording correct. Because if you tell me, well, can I scan AWS? I would say, no, stop, don't do this. There might be corner cases, specific EC2 instances you can scan. We don't care anymore because we know you can't harm anyone else. But in general, well, don't scan us. And especially not our command interfaces. That's a no-go. But if you say, well, I'm testing my applications against resilience for specific threats, which are only applicable to my application, that's okay. I typically say, well, if it's inside a fully negotiated TCP session, it's most likely already better. There can be challenges, but still it's good. And similar with DDoS simulation, I get this questions of customer, well, where's your DDoS tool? Well, I hope we don't have a DDoS tool, because running a DDoS from AWS to others is strictly against the AOP, right? So we have a tool for preventing incoming DDoS, what the customer potentially means. But you see sometimes as security and compliance you need to be pretty picky, because if I say, well, it's here, they say, oh, okay, let's go and DDoS this bank over there. So we need to be careful. We also know that if you opt into a service like Shield Advanced and want to test something, that you might run a DDoS-related test up front. And therefore, we have a DDoS simulation inbound page where you can say, well, this is what we want to do. Can we do this? And you get an approval or deny. Similar with testing and scanning. If you're not sure, asking something over those pages is a good idea, or contact us. We know that's important for our customers to be able to know their own vulnerabilities. I love our customers to know their own vulnerabilities. I love our customers to do those things just in the right way. If customers call me and say, why I'm doing Nessus, I say, well, that's not defined enough. Nessus can do everything. So that's not a scan. And also, especially if I have a testing specialist who says, well, I'm running Nessus and nothing else, I would say we need some more enablement, some more training. Because the first thing I then ask, well, what exactly are you doing? What's your test? Go down to the protocol. Tell me, which packets do you send to us? I'll tell you whether it's a good idea or whether you should ask us over the scanning policy. And a solution architect is not there to say yes and no to the decision, can you or can you not, but we are there to sort things out, to make sure to clarify and to make you aware of the scanning. So don't scan non-approved services, please. Not that we are so much afraid of it. It's more like, well, if you do this, well, what shall we do? We need to terminate or suspend something, right? We don't have the option to opt out and say, well, that's okay. So it's not okay. Stick to it. And keep the liability in view. I already said as an SA, using the word already generates an earthquake. But keep in mind, if you scan something on our side and you generate damage, you're liable. And please read the corresponding wording in your contracts before you go into this risk. Hint. Yeah, and I already mentioned scanning is not equal testing. Work with us. We'll find a way to navigate here together with you. Good. Having said those, let's look forward into the last section of the talk. It's basically about service level agreements, SLAs. Yeah, SLAs are continuous fun. I'm doing this now while I'm running the talk almost for 9 years for AWS, and we had the SLA since all my time here, I think. Yes, at least for EC2, yes, we had the SLA. So from an overview standpoint, the SLAs which we have are orientated on the APIs. You, for example, see this in S3 that we say, well, you can send us an S3 API call, and we're out of SLA if we send you back a 500 internal server error. Does this mean that addresses your S3 use case? It's your decision. We turn around the SLA. If you think we violated the SLA, you need to tell us. We will not reach out to you and tell you that we might have done something. A little hint is that our health dashboard, the generic health dashboard, tells you by service an information. And if we say we see increased error rate, that's here. That's the API errors. If we see increased error rate, maybe it's good for you to check whether you see the errors on your side too. Because if you want to have an SLA claim based on error rate, you need to tell us, well, there, I send you an API call, you didn't respond in time, or you did respond with a 500 internal server error. By the way, if we don't respond, that's not in the SLA definition. Only if we send a 500 internal server error, then that's an SLA call. Because, well, do we know whether your network connection to our endpoint is working? We don't know. And also, while people having a hard time reading this, and especially if you come from an outsourcing standpoint, look at it from our side, from a service provider standpoint. We don't know when you send us an API call. Why should we give you money back if you have not sent us on something? In my case, my photos or also my music is on S3, and maybe I don't need this for a while, especially while I'm in Boston. So if AWS is down or has a problem with this object in the time I'm not using it, there's no SLA violation, right? And therefore, it's important that you work through this. And if you think you need a refund, work the process which is outlined in the SLA. You need to have evidence. You need to write a support case to us with the right wording, and then we'll process this information. And well, what happens then? Well, we can give you back money you have spent. If you have not spent money, we can't give you back something. And that's, and especially for industries with additional compliance and security requirements, a challenge, because some of those industries want to offload risks. Like, hey, this is one EC2 instance with my core banking. I want to have $50,000 from you per hour when this instance is not running. And sorry, that's not our business model. Maybe you'll find a partner who's signing that. I call them risk eaters. But AWS will not sign that. We are not responsible for whatever is on the instance. We only can give you back the money you spent on those instances. So and if this is an, let me say, M3 small, for a couple of dollars, you get back a couple of dollars if we failed. Or matter of fact, and we'll see this in other pages, EC2 is just not charging you if you don't fulfill the hour for in one instance. So therefore, refund is fun, is an interesting part. And also what you get back and how to report it. Last but not least, unavailability does not mean we have a target to restore. We get this question, okay, what's your time to recover? Difficult to say, right? If your instance is done, your instance is done. It's power off, game over. What shall we recover? Nothing. Well, we can start the shell of the instance, but not what's inside. If you have requirements for recovery time, if you have requirements for uptime, if you have requirements for risk transfer, talk to us. That's a typical solution architecture task to take care of those things. It's the core of our, not the core, but it's a substantial part of our business to take care of this. Just it's not in the contracts. It's not risk offloading to AWS. We are not taking those risks. The SLAs, similar like service teams, they change over time. I've seen the most SLAs changing. I've seen EC2 changing. I've seen S3 changing, and I've seen some others. And also read the terms and conditions. What's an outage, what's not an outage. And especially the path to AWS is a challenge. If you're somewhere on the internet and it's not working for you, that does not mean we have a problem. Therefore, the dependency on general infrastructure like internet, that's an important part. And if there are bigger outages or things which we don't control, we might not be in the SLA situation. So therefore, read the framework. Again, make sure the framework meets your requirement. And if you have questions or need additional stuff, well, talk to us. Summarizing that, risk offloading to AWS is in the majority of cases not possible. Also, the SLAs are different than you expect, and especially from an outsourcing standpoint. And watch out about availability and durability. Those topics are not the same thing. And I said this already, contact us, review things. So let's look a little bit into a specific SLA, EC2, including Elastic Block Store. There's a single instance SLA. That's nice. If we keep an instance not up for 56 minutes, we don't charge you. That's a little game changer. There's another SLA for multi-instances, and the multi-instances, that's an interesting part. Basically, we would need to have all instances of multiple availability zones not able to answer your request through a packet, not answering a packet or not working their I/O queues. Again, all instances. So if we have, let me say, 3 ACs, one AC has a problem and one instance in another AC is surviving, the SLA is fine. We don't care about all the other instances. If you have 900 instances down, one is surviving, it's fine for us from an SLA standpoint. We got a lot of discussions about this, and then we inserted the 56-minute single level instance SLA. That's fun, that's good. The all EC2 thing, that's more a thing of us addressing the availability zone topic. So keeping an availability zone up, but keep in mind, theoretically, we could take for EC2, we could take an AC out of availability, and the SLA is fine. That does also mean there are implications. If you need availability guaranteed and then functional SLA, you need to rely on more instances, on more availability zones. And on the other side, I strongly recommend to have reserved instances, because what happens if we have a problem in an AC? Well, everyone else is running to the other ACs. If you have no reservation there, we might not have instances. So therefore, take care of your reservation. Oh, you want to make a picture? It's just, yeah, here. By the way, just read it. It's all written down there. I just summarize this a little bit in a compressed form. Another one, Lambda or SQS, that's a typical API SLA. The availability is defined by the 500 internal server error. In each 5-minute interval where you have not sent us any request is automatically up. And you need to report a problem through your log files. You need to prove you have sent us a call and you got back a 500 internal server error over the next 5 minutes. And then we discuss with you SLAs. If you don't have a log file, well, we can't do anything. So the logging is on the customer side in this case. Because we can't know when you have called us, so we can't say, well, we are out or in. Yeah, if we have a challenge, why should we reach out to everyone and say, hey, have you tried to use us? Oh no, okay, then we don't have to talk. Oh, you tried to use us. You have a log file? Fine, let's go through this. So that's a typical EC2, or that's a typical Lambda or SQS API-based SLA. And then we have the RDS SLA, which is also a different one. It defines single level, single AC databases, multi-AC databases. Also, it's very important, the SLA is only applicable if the customer uses the basic operational guidelines. If you overrun the instance and crash it, your problem. If you take care of memory correctly, your problem. If you have set something up, your problem. So therefore, you need to first stick and prove that you have implemented the basic operation guidelines and not violated them. Then we talk about the SLA. In this case, we talk about monthly calculation of a 1 minute interval. That's also an important point. And if you have only part of the month worked with the RDS system, the other part where you have not activated it is up. So if you just use it in the last 5 days, you can't call us for the whole month. That doesn't work. Good. So 8 minutes left. Let me summarize that. From the very beginning, with custom agreement, click through. Everything starts here. From there, very important, we have the service terms. The service terms might be stronger than the custom agreement. And from the service terms, we have the GDPR, DPA, or the other ones. And both of those things make the certification SOC reports mandatory. So that's the important part. That's a shell. That's a surface of AWS to operate. We have supplementary addendum and standard contractual clauses also through the service terms, but that's more important for the people who are on the contractual side. And from the technology side, the acceptable use policy is important, and a derivation from the acceptable use policy, we have penetration testing, DDoS testing, and the simulated event situations. And last but not least, parallel to all of that, we have the SLAs. And that is the documentation you need to keep in mind if you use AWS. Not necessarily as a developer, but as a company, as an organization, you should have reviewed those things, you should know it, and you should align your usage of AWS to this framework. Good. So far, thank you for your time. Thank you for your participation. Wish you a nice time here in Boston.